Hey.
I feel like people aren't appreciating the 2021 LA Clippers enough right now. And I say that because in recent years, starting the earliest I can remember it is the season where we end up having the bubble, but a lot of people had the LA Clippers pegged as title contenders. And for good reason. They had Paul George, they had Kawhi Leonard, who was fresh off a championship run with Toronto, and for the most part, they had a solid team around them. And it really seemed like they had the talent and just the star power to get it done. But then when they blew the 3-1 lead to Denver, Paul George didn't play his best, Kawhi Leonard didn't play his best, and just ever since that point, I feel like people just haven't given the Clippers enough respect for what they've done since that point. Especially Paul George, who is the big reason why I'm even making this video in the first place, because I am so heavily rooting for the MVPG, Paul George for MVP campaign, and he's just been absolutely killing it to start the season so far. Throughout his first 13 games of the season, Paul George is averaging 26.5 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, over 2 steals per game, and I know for a certain stretch he was leading the league in both points and steals per game, which is just absurd, and the epitome of the two-way player that Paul George has been so good at being for so long now. And it really does pain me to see people still slandering Paul George for no reason or for stuff he's done in the past, because I know he got a lot of heat for the Dame Lillard comments after he sent Oklahoma City Thunder home in the playoffs. Paul George also had some suspect playoff outings in recent history, but honestly, since coming to the Clippers, since that 3-1 blown lead, Paul George has simply just been one of the best players in the NBA, and people have to start realizing that. Which is why it's even more of a shame that Kawhi Leonard had to have the meniscus injury or whatever ended up happening last season's playoffs, because if Kawhi Leonard stays healthy, I think it's a real shot that the Clippers could have went out and won the whole thing last season, and they probably would have a pretty good chance at repeating this year too, but again, obviously Kawhi is going to be out for quite some time. Because before I get into what's been going on this season with the Clippers and my thoughts so far, I do want to backtrack to last year's playoffs real quick and just remind people that, this Clippers team was in the Western Conference Finals. Not only did they make it there, but they beat the Utah Jazz without Kawhi Leonard to finish that series. And again, the Utah Jazz were the #1 seed in the league, best team, most wins, and the Clippers handled them pretty easily. Then in the Western Conference Finals, the Suns handled the Clippers pretty easily, but that's not to say that it wasn't a close series. The Clippers gave plenty of effort and had a lot of close games go down to the wire that unfortunately just didn't go their way. And with no Kawhi Leonard for those last couple of games of the playoffs, Paul George stepped up and was absolutely huge, and he's doing it again so far this season. In today's world, the Clippers are 8-5, 6th seed in the West, and the West has just been absolutely absurd this year. It's just utter chaos at this point. I don't even really know how to explain it. But when it does come to the LA Clippers, I think they're right exactly where I predicted them to be before the season. A lot of people were doubting what they'd be able to do with no Kawhi Leonard, but it seemed pretty sure to me that they would at least be a playoff team at the very worst, maybe a play-in team depending on how long it takes Kawhi Leonard to get healthy. But again, a positive record, a little over 500. I think this is exactly where the Clippers should be. Now the interesting part to me is that last season's Clippers were a very, very high-powered offense. They're the best shooting team in the league easily, especially from 3-point range. They're over 40% as a whole squad, which is just insane. But this year, offense has definitely been a bit more difficult for them. They currently sit 18th in offensive rating in the league. Meanwhile, on the defensive side of the ball, they've actually been pretty elite, as they are currently 3rd in defensive rating across the whole season. Now, I'll be honest, the defensive stat kind of surprised me at first, because I understand the Clippers are a good defensive team, but again, you lose Kawhi Leonard, one of the best defenders that the league has to offer, and you'd expect the defense to maybe take a hit. But when you have a roster filled out with guys like Paul George, who has just, again, been awesome defensively this year, top of the league in steals per game. You've got Terrence Mann, who is able to lock down a lot of good opposing guards and even some smaller wings. You've got Eric Bledsoe, who, say what you want about Eric Bledsoe, but his defense is pretty good. And you got Nikola Batum, who is just playing great in that sort of, Draymond-esque role, where he's playing a lot of off-ball, being a connector, just passing the ball, playing good defense. High IQ guy who's just able to understand the game of basketball. Then you throw in two bigs like Zubac and Hartenstein, who are just solid rim protectors, and overall you have the formula for a good defense. This is a team that knows that they're going to have to play defense to win games, and they've done it before in the playoffs. So again, it's not a surprise that the defense has been good, but at the same time, it's a little bit of a surprise. But again, I think the more surprising part is that the offense has just not been great. Outside of Paul George, I should add. He's been amazing. But everyone else has been a bit, just a little iffy here and there. Because Paul George is an elite player offensively. He's able to get to whatever spot he wants. He makes it look so easy. He's one of the most aesthetically pleasing offensive weapons that the league has ever seen. But when you look at the rest of the roster, there's just not a whole lot of guys that you can depend on to be second and third scorers every night, and it's been showing. I have all the love in the world for Reggie Slip and Slide Jackson. He's got one of the deadliest crossovers that the league has ever seen. He was awesome in last season's playoffs. You know, they were nicknaming him Mr. June or whatever month they labeled the NBA playoffs in now. I know it's been kind of crazy the past couple seasons. But it did take a little bit for Reggie Jackson to start getting going this year. Struggled at first, but across the last 8 games where the Clippers are 7-1 in that span, Reggie Jackson's up to 20 points a night, which is going to be something that needs to be kept up by him if the Clippers want to continue to keep winning games, especially against the better teams in the NBA. Sometimes I feel like Reggie Jackson tries to do a bit too much offensively for this group, this team, but at the same time, I'd rather him be pulling up for some iffy shots rather than, you know, like a Nikola Batum or an Eric Bledsoe or just really anyone else on the lineup besides maybe like Luke Kennard or obviously PG. Terrence Mann is a name I want to talk about really quickly because he's a solid player. I love Terrence Mann. I think, to me, Terrence Mann is someone who kind of plays that Bruce Brown role where he's a guard, but he can play at the 4, maybe even give you some 5 minutes. He can work perfectly in the short role, can go get you some buckets, can go get you some rebounds, can play some defense. He's just a great utility guy. But one thing that very much intrigued me about Terrence Mann, especially in last year's playoffs, was he was showing a lot of potential for creation off the dribble, offensively, especially in the Utah Jazz series. I know he had the career night where he lit him up for like 40 points or whatever he had. But anyway, I was really hoping to see more of that off the dribble offensive creation flow into this season, and I just feel like it hasn't been there at all so far to start the year. Which again is upsetting because Terrence Mann remains a very key player on this team. I know he comes off the bench, but he plays, I think he's like 4th in minutes played. Oh, let me check that real quick. 3rd in minutes per game. Yeah, he comes off the bench, and that's a fine role to me. I just wish that he would be a bit more aggressive with his offensive game, especially considering how lackluster this Clippers offense has been at times this year. And then one last point I wanted to make about the Clippers offense, just because it's another thing that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but Luke Kennard needs to be let loose on the offensive side of the floor. In fact, the whole Luke Kennard situation has been really weird. The Clippers signed him to that 4-year, $64 million deal a couple years back, and they just refused to play him at first. Then last season, they finally started giving him some more run off the bench, and he was really good. And then this year, especially again, no Kawhi, Marcus Morris has only played 2 games, which has just opened up even more opportunities for Luke Kennard. And yet they still I feel like they don't utilize him as much as they should. Since coming to the Clippers, Luke Kennard is shooting at a 44% rate from 3, yet he's only been taking 4 a game in his Clipper career, which just, that number needs to go up. I don't know if it's they gotta run more pin downs for him, more just off-ball stuff for him in general, or just whatever they need to do, but Luke Kennard should be getting up way more 3s. I know this season he's up to 6, which is definitely a good increase over last season's numbers, but again, with an offense that is struggling like this Clippers team, with Paul George having to do it all right now, and he's doing a decent job so far, but he'll probably slow down at some point. The Clippers are going to need other players to step up, and Reggie Jackson might be good to get you 20 every now and then. Eric Bledsoe might occasionally have a night where he can be suboptimal, at least offensively. But Luke Kennard is someone that I wish the Clippers would rely on a bit more, because he's a really gifted offensive player and he could do a lot of damage to opposing defenses. Anyway, at the end of the day, this Clippers team, they just went on a 7-game win streak. Obviously had a kind of rough start to the year with the 1-4 start, but since then have been really good. This is a team that deserves respect, should have respect from NBA fans, even without Kawhi Leonard playing right now. I understand that their schedule has been a bit easier than some other teams around the league, but nonetheless, it's been impressive to see them get off to this 8-5 start, and with all the moving parts around this Clippers team, the core idea here is that Paul George has been balling to start the season. By the time that we're 60 games into the season, are the Clippers going to have enough wins for an MVP case for Paul George? I don't know. All I know is that I've been pushing for the MVPG campaign. I'm going to continue to be pushing the MVPG campaign because Paul George is an amazing player. He deserves more respect after some rough years with the media, and yeah, we're all here for the Clippers being a fun, enjoyable team, even while Kawhi Leonard is on the sidelines. And if you've made it to this point in the video, then congratulations, you're a real one. Now, if you enjoyed this video, maybe think about hitting the subscribe button. Should be somewhere in this general direction. Or if you're not sure yet, maybe check out another video which should be in this general direction. Either way, thank you for watching.